today with Anthony Aquilato, who for nearly 40 years has had about any job you can think of on the road touring with some of pop, rock and roll, R&B, and country music's biggest artists. He's worked with people like Ringo Starr, Keith Richards, Hall & Oates, Sade, Sheryl Crow, Neil Young and Crazy Horse, and many, many others, too many to count here. I'm so grateful for his time today. He's going to be talking to us about live touring. Thank you, Anthony, for being here.
No problem, Jen.
You grew up in the Bronx and started your touring career at age 17 with one of my favorite bands from the sort of disco funk era, Chic. How did you begin this at such a young age?
I was working at SIR in New York as a rehearsal tech. And there were so many bands that just came in and out, to rehearse. They would occasionally grab guys, and say, hey, can you come out and do a weekend show with us? Or can you come do this? Or can you come do that? And then if you got clearance from the boss, I really can't remember, but that's basically how it started. I started with a band called Atlantic Star. It's funny, I just saw Paul Pesco, who was a player in Atlantic Star back then, and we were reminiscing, because he's playing with Rumor now, and we were reminiscing about those days. And then, so the Atlantic Star gig opened the door to the gig with Chic, because they were rehearsing at SAR as well. And then once I got to meet Niall and Bernard, it was done.
Did you like traveling immediately?
Yeah. I was ready to get out of the house, I was 17 years old, ready to leave the Bronx, ready to get out of the house. It was either go to jail or, go somewhere else,
Did you finish high school? I don't know this.
I did not finish high school.
That's amazing.
I did get my GED in my sophomore year. I had my GED. So that was 2 years before my graduating class.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Did you? So you learned on the way, I guess, or on the road. You sort of picked up all the skills that you need to be, in demand, world-class guy that you are today.
Yeah, I did study a little in school. There were some college courses that I took. I went to Bard and the University of Bridgeport and took some courses in broadcast journalism and radio and television journalism, because back then in the 70s, that's all there was. There wasn't the Recording Institute of America. There weren't Full Sail. All these places didn't exist. Yeah. So that's how I kind of got like a broad spectrum of what was actually happening technically, you know what I mean?
Right.
How journalists were in the field recording things, and I was always kind of like the AV guy.
Right.
I was always the guy, even in grammar school, I would be running the lights on the stage. I figured out how to run all the lights. So I always ran the movie projector at summer camp, and things like that. It's just something that I always was very interested in.
Well, and it's the technology part of it, of course, is changing all the time. And I wonder if you could say a little bit about how you stay on top of the changes that are still happening. I'm sure every tour you do, there's some new piece of equipment or something that you've got to get on top of and run it for that tour.
Read the manual. Yeah. My wife and I were just talking about this yesterday. She's the NRTM. I'm the ARTM. I always read the manual. She never reads the manual. Trying to figure out the Bluetooth in her car. I was like, I guess I'm going to have to read the manual to do this. There's always a piece of gear that you have to learn how to use. I learned how to read the manuals when I learned how to use the gear that you were using, or any other band. That's how you stay on top of it. YouTube is great too now. There's so much video information that people will do things like this. They'll just record videos for people to watch on the internet, because there's so much information to be had. The internet is just so great that way,
Yeah. What do you think some of the biggest misperceptions are that people have about life on the road with rock and roll bands? Or any kind of band?
Well, that it's glamorous.
Yeah.
Because it's not.
It's not.
It's a lot of work. There's nothing glamorous about being on the road and living out of a suitcase. I lived out of a suitcase for 30 years, when I was a kid. It's great to see the world. It's great to travel. There's a lot of great things you can take away from that. But most of the time, you're working. The first 5 times I was like in Paris, for say, if I can say Paris, I never saw anything but the inside of the arena. So I went to Paris and I saw the inside of an arena, which looks like the inside of every other arena that you were in that week. There's nothing different about it. There's nothing glamorous about it. It's a lot of hard work for everyone involved.
That's true. What do you think, some of the qualities are personally that a person needs to have? Speaking of, well, it's not glamorous and it's a lot of hard work. I mean, what makes somebody a good person to work with on the road? What are some of the personal or professional qualities that make somebody a good either tech or musician that tours?
Well, I mean, you ultimately got to be able to get along with people.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, I guess that's a given. You can't not get along with the 12 other people you're on the bus with, or the 20 other people you're on the jet with, or, I mean, there's only so much compartmentalization that there is, on the road. Well, like the diva or the El Divo may have his little compartment with his posse, but everybody else is in the cattle car.
Right.
Hey, you can't get along, you find yourself out.
Gone.
Yeah, more than likely, yeah. Somebody will say he's not working or she's not working, not part of the team. There is a big team involved, So I think that's the most important thing.
I guess we were just talking not so long ago about your work as an audio engineer. Is that where your real sort of passion is? Do you like mixing?
Yeah, I when I was a kid, I always thought I wanted to be a record producer. I would still love to be a record producer, but I realize now that I'm an adult that you really need to be a really great musician. I think the really great record producers are really great musicians too. Mm. It's great to think that you could be George Martin and make a Beatles record, but George Martin was I think he was an oboist or something, but had a great background in music.
Yeah, wonderful keyboard player too.
Yeah. So most of the great record producers are great musicians, and they understand the language of music. Mm-hmm. So that's something that I know that I never will understand because I'm not a musician. I'm never trained as a musician, but I do understand sound. I always liked the way things sound. I was always interested in the sound of things. I feel fine. I know now what that feedback was because it's been well documented. But as a kid, I dropped the needle on that record over and over and over again just to listen to that feedback to go, what the fuck is going on? What is happening here? It just really, it just really triggered something in me, so much so that I wanted to learn about sound. So I studied that. I took music classes in high school. I took electronic music classes. I listened to Stockhausen records and, Tomita records and Walter Carlos and Wendy Carlos records. Just to listen to sounds, just to try to figure out how that was happening, what was going on, So that's really my passion. But getting into the business, I found my way getting into the business as like a crew person. Mm-hmm. And I would hang out at the Academy of Music and help load trucks, just to try to meet the locals, the union guys, the local guys, and then ultimately try to get a job, which did get me a job. And into the clubs in New York, and then I started mixing sound in the clubs, and a few of the clubs in the 70s that there were there, Max's and a place called the Great Gildersleeves and CBGB's, and you just kind of float around. You mixed
at CBGB's?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. CBGB's had a great sound system that was put together by a guy named Charlie Martin, he was like a genius sound engineer. They had a patch bay. You could patch the compressors or the EQs in wherever you wanted. It was really set up like a recording studio. It was really fantastic. Another friend of mine, Robin Danar, who used to mix there all the time. He was one of the house mixers, is now just opened another club in Los Angeles. And you have to have a real passion for sound, Mm-hmm. But Charlie had a great thing going, and CB's. I didn't work there, but I mixed there quite often because of the bands I worked with. Mm-hmm. Played there all the time.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about tour managing and what that involves and what your experience is like? Sort of wrangling musicians and taking care of that.
Yeah, that's basically a lot of what it is. Tour managing is like executive babysitting. There's a lot that goes into tour managing because putting a tour together is a big undertaking. So whether you're working as a tour manager, which is seeing the big picture, of the whole tour and dealing with the artist on that level. And then dealing with the production manager who's dealing with the technical aspects of the tour and making sure that there's a show every day.
Right.
But the tour manager is dealing with travel, dealing with the artists, dealing with all the things involved on that level. And that is more, I hate to say babysitting, but there's a lot of hand holding that goes on being a tour manager, to make sure that the artists and the musicians are comfortable and they can perform every night. I mean, there's that's about as broad as it can be, but is as narrow as it can be too,
What do you think people need to know about instrument techs and doing that kind of work? I mean, how is that sort of different than the other jobs that you've had in terms of your day-to-day experience or the skills you need?
It certainly helps if you're a musician. I mean, to be a really great guitar tech, it really helps if you can play the guitar. Mm-hmm. I mean, and when you get to a level where the band isn't doing sound checks, then all the techs should really know how to play the instruments so you can get through it. I mean, I was a drum tech for a good number of years, but I could never play the drums. But I learned how to tune drums and maintain a drum kit when I was mixing in the clubs, because the clubs always had shitty drum kits and backline. And if you wanted them, being the sound guy, if you wanted them to sound good, you had to get in there earlier and get them sounding good. And so, being in a club with a bunch of backline, bunch of regular house gear, I learned how to get the house drum kit to sound good. So when I mixed the band that played on it every night, at least I knew I had something that I could get and go for.
Right.
So being an instrument tech, or being, a tech, tech is a broad term, because there are guys that can take amps apart and put them back together again, mm-hmm. and guys that can take guitars apart and put them back together again, change pickups. Mm-hmm. And then there are guys like me who, I can pretty much maintain a guitar, tune strings and change strings, and maybe do a basic intonation and things like that. But if someone were to hand me their guitar and say, hey, I want you to change the pickups on this and get it ready for the show tonight, I would be amiss, Mm-hmm. But there are guys that can do that. Yeah. And those are great techs, great luthiers and techs. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if they just never wanted to be musicians, or they just find themselves happier doing that.
Right.
And being of service to a musician. I carried my first guitar into a gymnasium when I was 13 years old with my cousin's high school band, and was standing in the back of the gymnasium when there was no PAs, and him saying, tell me when you can hear the guitar and tell me when you can hear me singing, you know what I mean? And they were balancing everything on the stage. Mm-hmm. There was nothing as complicated as it is today. And that pretty much started it for me. I would do that on weekends with my cousin, just stand in the back of the room and listen to them play, and then tell them, yeah, no, it's all good. I can hear you and I can hear the guitar, and, everything would start to sound balanced. And it really started to train my ear back then at a very young age, which was great. You feel like you're doing something, you mm-hmm. feel like you're part of it. I mean, I wasn't in the band, but I was with the band. And it was cool to be a young kid and doing that kind of stuff. I still have that passion. I think we all still feel that way. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. About things like that. At least I do.
Mm-hmm. Here's a half-serious question that I actually don't know the answer to. Is roadie a derogatory term? Because I hear people saying I'm a tech, or I'm an engineer, or I'm a
I don't know. I think that the term has evolved over the years.
Yeah.
And it's broader. Back in the day when you were on the road in the 60s, possibly, Yeah. If you weren't with the band, if you were working as the crew, you were a roadie. It was just a term. I'd like to know who coined the phrase, I mean, and I don't think back then it was broken out. You know,
Just anybody who was
these
not
are the
right,
the
right.
road crew. You're the
Right.
road crew. You're a roadie. You're part of the road crew, right?
Right.
Now it's much more diverse. You've got the video crew. You've got, you know, the lighting crew. You've got LDs and front of house engineers, monitor engineers. You've got, you know, there was a term in the 80s, the boffin. There was an English term, the boffin. That was the guy who could take everything apart and put it back together again. He was the real tech guy. Like, so when your keyboard went down, you brought it over to the boffin. He was the guy who just sat there with the soldering iron all day long and was fixing circuit boards or rebuilding amplifiers. He just was fixing stuff all the time. You know, the first time I heard that was on an English tour in the 80s. You know, it's like, oh, wow, that's the guy. Yes, you know,
Right.
I'll get my shit breaks. I'm going to bring it to him. You know,
Right.
that's what he's here to do, you know. Then there's programmers, you know, guys that sit and program. And I was doing that for a long time with Hall & Oates. There was a lot of programming back then. We're in the MIDI age, you know. Everything was programmed. Now it's Pro Tools, you know, or a digital performer. Now there's playback where, you know, there's a guy sitting way over there with, you know, 185 tracks of playback, you know, to make sure that it sounds just like the record. Even though all the bands are still playing and everybody's participating, there's like a whole nother element that's going on that didn't happen, you know, back then. But those guys are still they're still part of the road crew. They're still the roadies, but I'm sure they'd be very upset if, you know, the Pro Tools playback guy, you know, was called a roadie, you know,
Right.
because he's got a, you know, pretty significant job,
Yes.
you know.
Yeah. What are some of the changes that you've seen happen in the world of live touring in the decades that you've been working on that side of the business?
You know, what I've seen and what I can correlate, you know, in my own world is that as the recording process has gotten more sophisticated, the live performance process seems to follow that.
Oh.
You know, in the days of simpler recording, you know, the live performance process was simple. And synthesizers, more technology in the studio, consoles that had recallability, you know, the mixes became more sophisticated, albums became more sophisticated. And in essence, the artists wanted their performances to be as sophisticated as the records they were making.
Right.
So now you have technology kind of chasing technology.
Right.
Because the technology in the live form, in the performance form, didn't really exist. So I can tell you for a fact that we were creating it in the studio. As we were creating records, and I can attest to this with Hall & Oates, and as technology was in the mid-'80s, where there were just leaps and bounds of technology with synthesizers and samplers and the way music was being kind of modified and sounds were being modified. The things that Peter Gabriel was doing with the Fairlights and synclaviers and sampling all sorts of sounds to be played back differently. Well, when that was incorporated into a record and that record became a hit, well, that artist wanted to do that and be able to perform that because obviously the audience wanted to hear that. You know, we weren't simple folk bands anymore. It wasn't, you know, I don't want to say Peter, Paul, and Mary with any disrespect to Peter, Paul, and Mary because they were fantastic, but it wasn't just three singers just playing guitars and singing beautiful harmonies that they could do by themselves without any help from anyone else. No, there was no technology involved in that. So as the technology kind of overtook the recording process, it followed that the live performance aspect had to follow that technology too. And it's chased itself all the way to the point where you go into the studio now and you make a record and you have 196 tracks of Pro Tools. You need to take those 196 tracks of Pro Tools out on the road with you or some form of that and make it happen so it sounds just like the record. Right. Otherwise, your audience is not happy. They don't get it. And then there's the video experience and the lighting experience and all that other stuff, which just adds to it. You know, the Joshua Light Show back in the 60s started this whole kind of, you know, tripodelic, psychedelic thing. Now you have crazy video and, moving lights and.
I love that idea that the live music technology has sort of been chasing recorded technology the whole time. And I know it's something that musicians think and talk about a lot. Well, do we need to recreate the record or not? What happens if we sort of, run at this from another angle? I mean, do you think that it's important most of the time for musicians to try to do something that sounds like the record when they're on stage? What are the most compelling, attacks on that, issue for you? Or approaches, what do you think that?
Well, personally, I think that any group of talented musicians, on stage can replicate a record as complicated or as simple as it can be, and still put together a show that's really compelling and gives the audience, everything they want. I watch artists do it all the time. Sean Colvin, for example, makes great records. She makes great records with great producers. And then she goes on the road with her guitar and sits down and plays her songs. And, it's as compelling as it can be. She doesn't need a big band behind her to convey the emotion in the songs that she writes, because it comes from within, And I think any good artist, any good songwriter can sit down with their instrument and do exactly that. But they can also then get the 12-piece band and make it sound just like the record if they want to do that. But, their audience knows, their audience knows. So go from Sean Colvin as an example to Madonna as an example, or Lady Gaga, or one of the other formidable female artists, or even male artists, Justin Timberlake maybe, Justin Bieber maybe, could they go on stage by themselves with just a guitar and translate their really sophisticated records to their audience, and would their audience be happy? Would it be as compelling as the big over-the-top hoopla show with all the video and all the lighting and all the dancers and all the stuff? Because that's entertainment, right? That's what people are paying to be entertained. So it really, I think, depends on the artist and what the artist brings. I'm entertained by people like Sean Colvin, on that level. There's nothing not entertaining about that. And so much so about Madonna too, that she's really entertaining when you watch her show. There's a whole lot going on, and it crosses lots of boundaries, and it just becomes just a wonderful experience. And all those artists, there's a lot that goes into it. I'm working with Sade, that particular show was rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed. So it was a moment of 2.5 hours that was just one big moment that every little piece of it was put together to make the audience feel like they were part of it, and brought into it, as big as it was from song to song, or as small as it got, because there were moments where it was just Sade and Andrew playing piano. And it really just came straight down to nothing except the two of them. Really intimate music, more intimate than it was recorded. And then got really big and bold again with video and lighting and the whole band and the singers and, But I think every artist takes the time, well, I would hope every artist takes the time to think about that, and what they want to present to their audience,
So I would imagine that for example, the Keith Richards thing would have been a lot sort of looser and not sort of planned down to the detail or as well rehearsed as what you just described with Sade. Is that true?
Keith Richards rehearsed, Looser, yes. You know what I mean? Because it wasn't structured with video and time code, and everything had to be frame by frame. There was frame by frame accuracy, right?
Yeah.
Keith Richards was a rock and roll band. He's a rock and roll player. There was a lot of rehearsals. We rehearsed for probably a month. We rehearsed all night long. I remember it being a lot of work, in as much as that the crew still had to work during the day to get everything ready for a rehearsal that would start at 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening and go until 6 o'clock in the morning. And then you got a few hours sleep, and then had to be back at it at 2 or 3 o'clock, or as late as you possibly could be, to make sure that you were still ready for when the musicians came back in. And there was a lot of stuff to maintain. I mean, there were fucking oodles of guitars. I had 12 different snare drums for Steve Jordan. There was a lot to do to keep it ready for them, because they were rehearsing a lot of music, and they wanted it to sound just like the record. I mean, Steve Jordan, and I can say this because working with him closely, for every different sound that he had on the record, drum-wise, we changed the drums. I changed snare drums almost every song. We changed cymbals every song. He wanted to use the elements that went into the drum kit that was on the track live. And again, that goes back to talking about, all the rest of the technology, chasing technology, Well, Steve was thinking about that on that level. And it's just like guitar players change their guitars.
Sure.
It's the same kind of thing. You know what I mean? I played a Strat on this song, so I'm going to play a Strat on this song. And I'm not going to just play a Telecaster all night long, because there are different tones. And some guys plug into different amplifiers. I do remember Mike Campbell with Tom Petty. When I was there one year, he had a bunch of different amplifiers, and different guitars went to different amplifiers through a switching system. You know what I mean? So his tech, if he handed him one particular guitar that was supposed to go through the AC30, that's where it was going, and one other guitar maybe went through a Fender Deluxe or whatever, to get tones, to get the sounds. Working with Keith Richards was just like that. I mean, there were elements that they wanted really to sound just like the record, so they did it, but they didn't do it with a lot of technology. They did it old school,
Right.
Old school technology, if I can say that. Working with Neil Young, he has an incredible work ethic. Rehearsals with Neil Young there's work involved. And every artist I've ever worked with, I can't think of one artist that I've ever worked with that pays no attention to what's going on in the rehearsal moment. The rehearsal moment is what brings it all together, so you can then take that and present it to the audience. And Neil's work ethic is incredibly strong. There's a lot of energy that goes into making it what he wants it to be. And I've never worked with him when there wasn't some sort of big picture. It's more than just Neil and Crazy Horse or Neil and the Blue Notes. There was always something else going on. The crew was always involved in the show. I don't know if you've ever seen any of those Neil Young shows. The crew's always involved. They're on the stage. They're working. He knows that. So he incorporates it all into the show. You know what I mean? So nothing is foreign, I guess, is a way to use it. If guys are moving on the stage and changing guitars, that's all part of it. He wants everybody to see that it's like a big living theater thing. He did that with Prairie Wind. Even if they're telling stories, I mean, Larry sweeping with the broom during Harvest Moon, he thinks about that and says, I want to incorporate that into my show. Well, that needs to be rehearsed as well, and then it's not just Neil Young. It's and more artists than I have worked with. I have seen shows and looked at what's happening on the stage and go, wow, what the fuck, and you realize this is part of the show, or this is part of the show. this has been rehearsed. This is made for the audience to see. This isn't just happening here today now. This happens every day at every show, and it's part of the experience. So I wish I could talk more about all the artists that I work with, but I think that you can take for granted that any artist, given his salt or her salt, spends a lot of time thinking about how they want to present themselves and their show to their audience. And that's a great thing, because it just makes for just a wonderful experience for the audience to see and hear and be part of.
What I love about your perspective on what an artist does during their show is that you seem so easily able to take it on its own terms, whether you're talking about the way that Keith Richards or Neil Young or Mariah Carey or Hall & Oates or Mikhail Baryshnikov, puts together. Because you worked, I think, with his company for a minute, too.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, is kind of a rare quality, to be able to, accept what an artist is doing on their own terms and sort of work from that perspective. Do you think that that's been a help to you as you've worked with all these different genres?
Yeah, for sure. I think you need to be, you need to be open-minded. It's art. They're an artist. It's an art form. You take for granted, I take for granted, that the artist is creating, and you get to step back and watch him or her create. And then when you are asked to become part of that or to participate in that, you become part of that art. And that becomes incredibly exciting and fulfilling, because you're not just some guy who's setting up gear. And even though those guys are still part of it, you got to take this all into perspective. The riggers, the stagehands, the truck loaders, the teamsters, the caterers, that there are hundreds and hundreds of people that go into putting on a Kenny Chesney stadium show. There's hundreds, maybe thousands, you know what I mean? To talk about Kenny Chesney, who is one of the great artists now in our time, who puts on an incredible stadium experience, right? And there's nothing that they're not thinking about. And there's nothing that he's not thinking about and talking to his team about and saying, I want to do this, can we do this? And then there's a bunch of people going, okay, how do we figure this out? Whatever it may be. I'm not going to make some crazy example up, but, and it becomes part of the experience, and then you become part of the art. You become part of it. You become the red or the blue or the green or the yellow. But without it, something's missing,
right.
And I think that everybody that's involved, and the reason why we are involved, is the same reason why you're involved as a musician. I mean, you get to create part of the art with the musicians. It's a very tangible, emotional thing as you play as an ensemble with a band, And then you have a whole nother core of people, the next level down, which means the stage crew, your roadies, your
Not
stage
next level down. Just
no, I will say it's the next level down, the next level out, the next layer of the onion. Okay? Let's put it like that. You have your artist, you have the band, you have the next layer, which are the guys who are handing you off the instruments, making sure everything is in tune. You have the technical squad on top of that. You have your lighting people, you have your sound people, your video people. Everything is tied together to create an experience for the audience, And at the end of the day, when you put on a great show, and everybody knows it's a great show, because you're done and you go, fuck, that was great. Everybody's got a big smile on their face and going, we did it. We had a great show tonight. Everything worked, and there's a great feeling of fulfillment, even while you're packing it all back into the trucks, even though you still got 3 hours of work to do and the band is off, drinking champagne and you're still packing trucks. There's still, you feel fulfilled that you put on a great show for the audience, and you're little part of it, as significant or as insignificant as anyone may feel. That it wouldn't have happened if you hadn't been there to do your little part. And I mean, that's what I take away from it.
There are people who say these days that with record sales shrinking, that touring and live performance is sort of going to be the answer for a lot of musicians. What do you say to people who say that live music and touring is a good way for musicians to make money, given the fact that they're probably not going to make as much money selling records? Do you think that's realistic?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't really know much about the music business, the business of music, even though I did work for a music company for a long time, for a good 10 years. But that's not what I did there. So I had nothing to do with the business of music. But yeah, you're right. Music doesn't sell anymore. You can get it for free because of the internet. And an artist's revenue is now touring. Merchandise sales. I know artists or know of artists that go play, personal shows. They do these things where they on their web page they'll come play your house for 50 people, or while they're on tour. They're circling a tour. Say, hey, we're going to be in Kansas City, Missouri. Anybody want me to come by and do a show? And they do. And they make a little extra money. And I think that's great. I mean, so yeah, I would say that there's always going to be performance. And hopefully performance will always afford the artist with some money. You won't have to perform for free.
Right. The subtitle for this class is "What is music worth?" And so we try to, I guess, think about how in different segments of the business, whether we're talking about recordings or live performance, value is assigned to that experience. Do you think that concert tickets or live music, door covers are priced fairly? Do you think that the way that money and live music from the consumer's point of view is sort of working out the way it should?
Jen, you're taking me out of my field here. Ultimately, okay. As a person, as a consumer, yeah, I would pay anything to go see someone who I wanted to see. Yeah. I mean, without music, there's chaos. I mean, music is really what holds the whole world together. I personally feel, it's the string that ties everything together. There's one piece of music can go all the way around the world and make everyone feel a certain way, I've sat through operas, I've sat through ballets, I've sat through symphonies. I love music. And there is that certain tangible emotional thing that's happening, whether it be rock and roll, whether it be, folk music, orchestras, ballet. There's that great scene in Amadeus where, the king tells him to take the music away from the ballet. So they're all just dancing around with no music. It's just like, no, that it's all tied together and it's worth every penny. And hopefully you can afford it as a consumer. Hopefully you can afford it and it's not outpriced. I don't know if somebody's $150 ticket is too expensive. There's certainly fans will pay, or somebody's $500 ticket. Maybe that's too expensive. You know what I mean? I don't know if that, but it all depends on if you got the money, and hopefully music should be affordable for everybody, the live experience for sure.
What do you think that people can do? What are some of the best things that people can do to support music in their own communities? What do you think that people can do? What are some of the best things that people can do to support music in their own communities? What are some of the things that people can do to help foster a healthy musical community? Yeah,
go out and see local music. Go to the clubs. I mean, that's it. There's especially in this town. I mean, there's plenty of places to see music. So, if you're interested in the local music scene, then go out to the clubs and have a beer and watch the bands. I mean, I think there's a difference between what happens here in a club like this and then what happens maybe on Lower Broadway. And I don't want to, I don't want to put brackets around Nashville. There's every city is like that. You know what I mean? There are other bars that have just bands that are just playing cover tunes for the fact, just to entertain people or to give them something for whatever. And that's great too, because people really enjoy that, and some people really enjoy that. And some people enjoy coming to, this place and seeing some touring band that's coming through, you know what I mean? And, they tour on all sorts of levels, whether it's the Ryman, whether it's here in a small club. There are artists of all levels that are trying to make a living out there playing their music to their audiences, wherever they may be. And I think that's how you support the industry in a whole. Just go out there when your band and your favorite band comes to town, you go buy tickets and you go see them. You know what I mean? And that's what it's all about, right?
I think so.
Yeah, we'd all be out of a job. We'd be out of jobs.